Welcome back to the next session on Service Operations Management. Now let's begin with our learning. In this particular session, we'll be understanding and dealing with the concept of importance of data, the learning objectives. At the end of this particular session, the learners will be able to understand what do we mean by data, what is the importance of data in the business organization, and what are the various activities that have been undertaken with respect to the data. And lastly, what are the various factors that affect the data and its importance? Now let's understand what do we mean by data and what is meant by or what is its importance. The various models for forecasting and collection of data has identified that whenever a particular information that has been available or which has been related to any source is been collected on the basis of which a certain output or results can be generated, such type of information that has been collected is called as a data. The forecasting activity with respect to the organization always try to identify and see that how do we forecast as to whether the customer is happy, whether he is satisfied or not. And based on those consideration, one has to consider as to what responsiveness, what satisfaction level is there at that particular stage. And hence, the data or collection or the availability of data is essentially important. And for those particular consideration, the collection of data is of a first step that needs to be undertaken. The data that is being required in an organization can be collected from various sources, but the structural durability of the data is essentially important, wherein the data may be related to marketing, it may be related to finance, it may be related to human resource, it may be related to operational activity, it may be related to the product or the performance, and so on. So for those particular consideration, it is essentially to see that in which model or in which specialization the data is being collected and how it can be applied. Based on the collection of data, one has to also see that what is the usage or the variability of these particular data. So enough data should be made available at every stage in order to identify and assess that what interpretations can be drawn by the organization. Now let's understand the various three most important sources of data. The three most important sources of data are number one, that is observation method, number two, that is survey method, and number three is experimental method. Now let's understand what do we mean by the observation method. The observation method of data collection focuses on how do we observe the various factors or accomplices that have been there in a certain organization or a certain product or a certain service. In our day-to-day concern, we observe various activities or various transactions. A customer purchasing a product, a person passing by from his home to a certain office, a particular person going to the store and purchasing certain goods and services, a particular children asking certain commodities or goods to their mothers, to their fathers, and so on. So based on the particular observations, one can collect the data as and when it is made available. This particular data is always called as the first-hand data because it is collected by the researcher or by the person who is collecting the data on the basis of his personal observations. At certain stages or at points, the observations may be different, wherein a particular person's observation may have a different interpretation, whereas another person who is collecting and observing the same data, his observations may be different. So the viewpoint or the angle of incidence of each and every individual may be different, but the findings or the output that have been recorded are always same. And hence, observation method is a type of collection of data which focuses on how do we observe the certain activity and at what level and from which angle of incidence the activity is being observed. So based on the observation method, that is without informing the customer or without informing a particular individual, just by observing the certain consideration or a certain situation, the data can be collected. The second method for collection of data is the survey method. So on the basis of a certain survey, the data can be collected from different people. That is, a questionnaire can be designed, a particular form can be created, which may be circulated to them either through an email, that is an online mode, or through an offline mode, and accordingly, the data from the individuals can be collected. The survey can be conducted either physically or it can be conducted through a virtual platform. The data that has been collected physically is called the method collection of interviews or the face-to-face interviews or the questionnaire method, or which has been collected through online portals are the online surveys that have been undertaken. So based on a particular survey, the data can be collected. The data that has been collected from on the basis of survey, it focuses on what is the performance of a certain product. That is, whether the product is performing effectively or the product is not performing effectively. What are their findings, what are their outcomes, and what are their observations as to the usage of a certain product or a certain service. So a customer feedback or a satisfaction survey can be undertaken, based on which one can come to a conclusion as to what are the outcomes or the undertakings of a certain product. The third most important sources of data collection is the experimental method. So on the basis of certain experiments or certain testings that can be undertaken, the experimental method can be implied. The experimental method is usually applied to a certain product or a certain commodity wherein a certain scientific calculations are being required. So for a data which is of a psychological nature or of the scientific nature, for those particular considerations, the experimental method is being applied. So based on certain experiments, that is the positive results and the negative results, based on what output is being generated or what statistic that we get, on those particular basis, the experimental method can be used. Now let's understand what are the various top 6 data collection methods. Number 1, that is interviews. Based on a collection of the data from the interviews, one can directly approach the person face to face, and accordingly the data can be collected from the people or from the customers. The people or the customers are available in the open markets. We can approach them either on the stores or on various platforms, and accordingly the data can be collected. Or the another method to collect the data is by visiting their homes. So accordingly, a prior appointment or an scheduling concern can be undertaken with respect to the interviews. And accordingly, the interview data, on the basis of interviews, the data can be collected. The second option or the second method of data collection is questionnaires and survey. So questionnaires and surveys are two perspectives in which either the data from the customers or the purchasers can be undertaken in form of a written questionnaire or from an oral questionnaire, wherein in case of a written questionnaire, the paper can be handed over to a customer and accordingly he can answer certain questions. In case of an oral questionnaire, a formal or an oral discussion can be undertaken, and accordingly the findings or the answers or the output that has been given by the particular customer or a responser can be noted down by the information collector, that is the person who is conducting a certain survey. So that's the perspective of questionnaire and survey. Number 3 method, the third method is the observations. So without informing a certain customer, without disturbing their personal lifestyle, a particular observations can be done through a certain customer. So accordingly, based on a certain observation, one can identify and see that how the customer is performing, what are the various activity that he is undertaking, and on what basis his performance is either influencing or getting changed. So on the basis of certain observations, the data can be collected from the customers. These particular observations can be done in an open market or in a closed environment wherever the customers or the particular respondents are available. The next perspective that for collection of data is on the basis of documents and records. So this particular type of research or the methods of data collection is called the secondary method, in which the documents which are already been published, the records or the information which is already available and published by some authority or a certain agency or by a government organizations, such records or information or documents can be referred and the data can be collected. The next consideration is the focus groups. So on the basis of collection of data from various focus groups, certain observations can be undertaken, certain experiments can be applied, and accordingly the results can be noted. So the data can be collected from the focus groups, in which a certain target or a set of people can be kept under certain observations, and accordingly by just observing or moving with respect to their data collection and purchasing habits, the data can be collected. And lastly, the sixth perspective is the oral histories. So based on a certain information that has been provided or that has been collected from the general public, on the oral information or oral historical data which has been heard from word of mouth, on that particular basis also the data can be collected. Now let's understand what are the 4 major types of data collection techniques that have been observed or that have been used. Number first is the observational method. So on the basis of an observational method, a particular person or an employee is being hired and he's been just given a task to observe certain activities. So accordingly, various observations have been undertaken, and it is the duty of that particular response collector to only collect the responses and note down the observations. He observes the particular individual very carefully with respect to his purchasing power, with respect to his behavior, with respect to his preferences, choice, habits, taste, and so on. And accordingly, he note down all those particular observations. So the movement of a particular individual, that is a customer or a respondent, is being observed for every minute, for every second, and accordingly the observations are being noted. The next method is the experimental method. So on the basis of certain experiments which can be undertaken either in a laboratory or either on the basis of certain scientific formulas, the experimental method can be implemented and it can be used. The next perspective is on the basis of certain simulation. Simulation is a certain techniques which takes into consideration about changes in a certain environment. So whenever a certain factor gets either increased or either decreased, whenever there is a change in the certain factors of production or changes in certain culture, then on the basis of certain simulation techniques that can be used, the various observations can be noted down, the various results can be noted, and accordingly the simulation technique can also be used. The next or the fourth major data collection method that is being used is in today's scenario is the derived method. So on the basis of the information that has been collected on the way, or either by the observational, experimental, or the simulation or any other method, one comes to a certain conclusion and the derivations are being drawn. So derived method is a method based on which the prior data that has been collected from the customers or from the respondents, one comes to a certain conclusion and accordingly a conclusion is being drawn. So that is the concept of derived method. Now let us understand what are the various ways to collect the data. The various ways to collect the data is, for number one, is on the basis of surveys. So one can conduct a particular survey and accordingly the information can be collected. Online tracking. So on tracking the feedback, tracking the mode or tracking the activities of the customers on the online platforms and accordingly collecting the information on the basis of their online presence and circulating certain amount of questions is also a part of data collection. Transactional data tracking. So on the basis of what transaction or what activities an individual is been undertaken. That is his performance, his willingness or his presence on a certain individual platform which is available online, or the data that has been available on the online portal which is of a public data domain. From those particular concern also the transactional data tracking can be undertaken. The next perspective is online marketing analytics. The concept of online marketing analytics focuses on how the customer is available on various platforms and how those particular platforms help to organize or identify the usage of data by a particular customer. So the marketing presence of a certain customer, the preference, habits, or the taste that are activities that have been undertaken on the online platform, all those activities impact at the greater stage. Accordingly, the online marketing analytics can be undertaken. The social media monitoring. So on the basis of the performance of a customer on the social media platforms, his presence on either Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, Pinterest, and so on, the performance can be observed, it can be monitored, and the data from those particular platforms can be collected. Certain data which is available in the public domain, from those particular sources also, the data can be identified, it can be resourced, it can be percolated, and the data can be used by the organization. Collecting the subscription and the registration data. This particular data is available from the various registration centers and the data that is been provided by the customer himself at the time of his subscription or at the time of his registration to a certain product or to a certain commodity or to avail a certain service. So based on the certain subscriptions that have been available, based on the information that is pre-handed or before priorly provided by the customer, or based on the registration that has been given by a certain customer, the data can be analyzed, it can be interpreted, and accordingly the results can be drawn. And lastly, in-store traffic monitoring. On the basis of in-store traffic monitoring, one can come to a certain conclusion or the data can be collected from the respondents on the basis of their performance or behavior inside a particular store. That is, when a customer comes to a store for purchasing or availing a certain goods or certain services, what is his performance and how he is performing or monitoring in this particular store. So, in-store traffic monitoring can also be undertaken. Now let us understand what is the importance of data collection. The data that we are collecting from the customers or from various sources, it helps to analyze about how the environment is being prevailing in a certain consideration and how those particular data that we are collecting will be helpful to the organization in the long run. So this particular data that we are collecting, it is essentially to see that we store this particular data, we analyze this particular data, and whenever the data that has been required to fulfill the needs, wants, and desire of a particular individual customers, those particular data will be used and the future contact generation or the satisfaction level of the customers can be increased. So the collection of data allows an individual to store and analyze the important information about the existing and the potential customers. So who are our existing customers and who will be our potential customers? If a new product is to be launched, then whether the new product should be pitched to the customers or not, such type of information can be collected and accordingly the data can be provided to the different peoples. The next consideration or the importance of data collection is collecting the information can also save the company's time and money by building a database. So when the database is collected from various different types of sources, it creates a database for a certain organization and accordingly for future marketing activities or future remarketing or retargeting activities or a certain efforts that an organization needs to undertake, the data is very essential or helpful and important. So based on the particular data that is available with us, the database can be available for several number of years. And when those particular data is been available with the company, if the company is launching a certain new product, then that particular new product can be pitched to the customers, and accordingly, the data collection techniques can be very effective and helpful. The another important of data types or the data collection is data types are an important concept because they are the consideration or they are the modes in which statistical method data analysis is been undertaken. And every data that has been collected is been identified or it is been segregated on the basis of different data types. That is, whether it is a qualitative data, whether it is a quantitative data, whether it is a research based data, or whether it is a non-research based data or a general data. So on the basis of different data types, the data can be analyzed accordingly. The various conceptual clarities can be identified and then the conclusions can be drawn. One has to analyze as to which type of data is into existence, whether the data is of a continuous nature or whether it is data is of an elementary or a non-continuing nature, wherein the categorization of data is essentially important. And whenever if a particular analysis goes wrong, then on those particular basis, the analysis can be undertaken in a very better and effective way. And for those particular consideration, the data analysis is very effective and it is very important. So here in this case, we understand that the information that we are collecting from various sources or various platforms is very important and it's very essential to analyze that what data we are collecting from the various platforms. The data that is being collected should be very specific, should be very definite, and should be always collected from the authenticated sources. There are various ways that are available for collecting a particular data, but accordingly, everyone must try to see that maximum amount of data should be collected, which creates a database for a certain organization and it creates a value or creates an importance to the business concern. And hence, improving the knowledge or improvement in the performance delivery of a particular product is essentially required. Now let's summarize what we have learned in this particular session. In this particular session, we have understood what do we mean by data and what is the importance of data. We have also understood and seen what are the various benefits of data record and what are the various benefits of data maintenance. And hence, in this way, we have concluded with this particular session. I hope you must have enjoyed the learning at this particular session. Thank you so much for your patience listening. Thank you.